My name is Kaylin, and I am the Executive Director of Columbus Veg Community, aka CVC. CVC is an all-volunteer run 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to make learning about veganism and trying out vegan foods as fun, friendly, and accessible as possible. I am thrilled to welcome you to our first ever virtual event today. Today's event is featuring the phenomenal Ragen Chastain, who I'll be introducing you to in just a moment. First, I'd like to give you a bit of background information about today's event. Last summer, some vegans were hanging out at a farmer's market, and we were talking about vegan t-shirts. It was brought up that many vegan t-shirts are not offered in sizes that fit vegans of every size. That conversation started us down a path of exploring topics, including size acceptance, fat phobia, diet culture, and more. As we dug deeper and deeper into the research, it became clear that size acceptance is a necessary piece of the work that we do as a nonprofit that takes a consistent anti-oppression approach to activism. At today's event, we are going to learn some foundational information about size acceptance, and the lecture will end with tying it all back to why this is important for us in the vegan community. We are excited to host a follow-up event to today's in just a few months, in which Chelsea Lincoln of Fat Vegan Voice will dive deeper into the implications for the vegan community with a lecture that builds upon today's. In between these two lectures, our Education Director, Evan Thomas, is available to hop on Zoom calls to chat more about these topics with anyone who's interested. Now, I have personally had the pleasure of seeing Ragen speak a few times, and I am thrilled to get to hear today's lecture and the Q&A. I really hope you're able to stick around for that because Ragen's Q&As are everything. So let me tell you a little bit more about Ragen, and then I will pass the mic to her. Ragen Chastain is a speaker, writer, and thought leader in the fields of body image, health at every size, athletes at every size, and corporate wellness. She is the author of the blog danceswithfat.org, the book Fat, the Owner's Manual, editor of the Prager anthology, The Politics of Size, and co-founder of the Fit Fatties Forum and Fat Activism Conference. Ragen is frequently featured as an expert in radio, television, and print, and in the documentaries Fatitude, America the Beautiful 2, A Stage for Size, and the PBS independent lens short, Ragen's More Cabaret. She is an ACE certified health coach, a 3-time national dance champion, and 2-time marathoner who holds the Guinness World Record for the heaviest woman to complete a marathon. She lives in Los Angeles and is training for her first and only iron distance triathlon. Ragen has generously donated her time, energy, and expertise to help us put together this program over the past 6 months. So if you're watching this video and are able to make a small donation to help us thank Ragen for all that she's done, you can find her PayPal and Venmo information in the comments of this video or on her website, danceswithfat.org. All right, thank you again so much for joining us today at our first ever virtual event. I know many of you are as excited as I am to hear the lecture. So without further ado, everyone meet Ragen Chastain.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. First of all, I think that's my favorite I have ever heard my bio read. If you've never had to sit through someone reading your bio, it's so awkward. And that was amazing. So thank you for that. And thank you for having me and for all the work that everyone at CVC has put into this presentation. I'm really excited about it. Before we get started, just to reiterate, this is going to be some foundational principles. Chelsea Lincoln, who's an incredible activist who I follow, will be following up with a more in-depth talk as well. I'll be presenting a lot of information, so don't feel like you have to get it all the first time. You're going to have a video. There'll be a Q&A. You can always email me if you have any questions. So my goal is just to give as much information as I can today that might be helpful. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So far, so good. Thanks for your patience, and we seem to be rolling. All right, let's get going. So, size acceptance and veganism. I want to start by separating two concepts that sometimes get conflated or confused. The first is size acceptance. Size acceptance is a civil rights movement. It says that the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should not be size dependent. So basically, fat people have the right to live without shame, stigma, bullying, or oppression. And it doesn't matter why we're fat. And it doesn't matter what the quote unquote consequences of being fat might mean. And it doesn't matter if we could or even want to become thinner. Fat people have the right to exist with basic human respect. Period. Like all civil rights movements, this isn't a debate or a show of hands. We're not asking people to give us these rights. We're asking people to stop taking them away through an inappropriate use of power and privilege. So size acceptance, again, not a debate. You either agree that fat people have the right to live without shame, stigma, bullying, or oppression, or you're wrong. Those are the only two options. Health at every size is different. Health at every size is an evidence-based paradigm for health, and it includes personal health, medical care, both physical and mental health. It includes public health, and basically it focuses on social determinants of health and healthy habits rather than manipulation of body size as a path to health. And so not only does it talk about ways that we can personally engage in supporting our bodies, but it also makes it clear that there are things out of our control that deeply affect our health. In our country right now, in the US, racism is a public health crisis, but we treat it like something that each person of color should have to deal with personally. And that's a huge problem. And so health at every size centers and focuses on the idea that everyone needs to have the same access before we can start talking about differences in outcomes. So a word about language to start out with. You'll notice I use fat, and I'll talk about that. You'll notice that I don't tend to use overweight and obese. And that's because those terms were made up. I mean, all words are made up, right? But these terms were created specifically to pathologize and medicalize a specific body size in a way that has not helped the health or happiness of the people living in that size, but has helped to create shame and stigma and healthism around those bodies. And so I will use them a bit in this presentation only because they are what's used in the literature, and we're going to talk a little bit about the studies, but in general, these are not terms that I would use to describe people. Fat and fingernails. You've probably seen it float around Facebook. Somebody will say, you're not fat, you have fat. Like you're not fingernails, you have fingernails. And while I'm sure this is well-intentioned, it's also problematic because, I will tell somebody who's picking me up for a speaking gig when we used to travel, so I'll be the short, fat woman, the brunette in the blue dress. And people have said to me, oh, don't call yourself fat. But in my life, no one has ever said to me, don't call yourself brunette. Don't call yourself short. And so the idea that we're looking for ways to talk around being fat suggests that we see a problem with being fat. No one has ever said to me, oh, you're not brunette, you just happen to have brown hair. Or you're not short, you're medically under tall. And so the way we talk about things matters. And that's why I think that these things that suggest that fat people should disassociate from our bodies don't tend to actually lead to greater health or happiness in those bodies. Person first language. This has started to be used more, and it's where they will say, oh, you're not, obese, you're a person with obesity, or for some reason, a person with overweight. And first of all, I feel like fat phobia gives me enough problems without making me grammatically problematic as well. But beyond this, person first language is something that was taken from disability community where it is controversial. And I don't mean to speak for disabled people. I have currently able-bodied privilege, but I do want to make it clear that it was taken from that community without any discussion of the nuance there and applied to fat people. And it has been pushed by groups that want to make fatness into a health condition, and those people tend to sell treatments, so-called, for being fat, and they're often dangerous and expensive. And so to say I'm not fat, I'm a person with fatness, again, asks me to separate myself from the body I live in all the time, which is not something that I find empowering. Straight size versus plus size. This is something that tends to get used, and I sometimes use it in a generalized way, but we need to understand that, first of all, the idea is of plus size tends to be gendered. It tends to be focused on cis women, and certainly not inclusive usually of non-binary people or trans or cis men. And again, it's the idea that there's a normal size and then there's an extra size. So for example, you may see on a website men's clothing, women's clothing, and plus clothing. And this is not about gender inclusivity, which will be great. This is about saying that plus size clothing is something separate entirely from the other clothing. And so it can be problematic in that way. So let's talk about non-stigmatizing language. I like fat. I like it for a lot of reasons. First of all, it accurately describes my body. I consider it a reclaiming term. It's a way to tell my bullies that they can't have my lunch money anymore. And it's also a way to say that this is my body. I'm not a thin woman covered in fat. I'm a fat woman. And that's how I exist in the world. And that's how I expect to be respected and accommodated in the world. Alternatives, you can use person of size, larger bodied, heavier, plus size, again. And then individually, people are allowed to identify any way they want. So for example, a lot of people use fluffy. Personally, I would like to be called almost anything more than I would like to be called fluffy. However, if someone else likes fluffy, I will call them fluffy all day. And so when we're dealing on an individual basis, people get to choose their own labels when they're part of oppressed communities. But in general, when we're talking about these things, it's important to understand how the language really works and what it means when we call people different things. All right, so fat phobia, what are we talking about when we talk about fat phobia? First of all, a fear and or a dislike of fat people. The source and result of size-based stigma, bullying, harassment, and oppression. And fat phobia increases with size. So as somebody, especially structural fat phobia, but all kinds of fat phobia. So as somebody gets larger, they tend to be affected more by various forms of fat phobia. It also increases with multiple marginalizations. So fat people who are also disabled, fat people who are also people of color, fat people who are also part of other marginalized communities, fat trans people, for example, face more discrimination. So what are some examples? At the workplace, fat people get hired less, paid less, and promoted less with similar qualifications. Some studies have found as much as a $19,000 differential between fat cis women and very thin cis women. And fat people sometimes get different benefits. Whole Foods made a bit of a splash when they decided that they would do their benefits partially based on BMI. And so employees with a higher BMI actually got less of a discount on Whole Foods food than employees with a lower BMI. Healthcare. Many fat people find it incredibly difficult to get the same basic healthcare that thin people tend to take for granted because we get diagnosed fat and we get prescribed a diet, often no matter what comes in. I have personally had doctors suggest dieting for a broken toe, a separated shoulder, and strep throat. And so it can be very difficult to get basic medical care, to get diagnostics. And then a lot of diagnostic methods are created for thin bodies. And so it's possible that a fat person can't even get the same diagnostic tools and procedures that a thin person would get. There's refusal of treatment. A lot of OBGYNs have special policies for fat patients, and some have simply refused to treat fat patients. And then there's medical care based on the idea that fat people's lives are inherently less valuable and more riskable than thin people's lives. And so, for example, a thin person with high blood sugar will be given interventions that are shown to lower blood sugar, to help control blood sugar. But a fat person may have recommended to them a surgery that completely changes their digestive system and risks their life and quality of life, attempting to get the same outcomes that the thin person is not asked to risk those things for. Travel. Fat people are often treated terribly for taking up space on public transportation. Pictures taken of us, videos taken of us. Sometimes we're even expected to pay twice as much for the exact same service. For example, on a plane, often fat people who need more than one seat are asked to pay twice as much, even though what's being sold is travel from point A to point B in a seat that accommodates you. And so the idea that some people should get accommodated and others shouldn't, should have to pay twice as much for that exact same accommodation, is based in fat phobia. And then daily life. There's street harassment, people yelling. When I was training for my first marathon, I had people throw eggs at me. Headless fatties, we are most often represented in the media as just a torso next to some negative view about fat people, and used as a negative example, sometimes even by people who would consider themselves to be progressive. So then the question I get asked a lot is, well, then what about fat people's health though? Let's talk first about BMI. BMI was created as a statistical tool by a statistician in the 1800s who was studying relative body sizes in large populations, and it was used to institutionalize racism. Now it's used as a cheap proxy for health in individuals, and it's still institutionalizing racism because it was created with white people as the norm, rather than being inclusive or creating different measures for people of different races. So the bottom line is that your weight in pounds times 703 divided by your inches squared, which is your BMI, is not a health diagnosis. It's not. It's simply a ratio of weight and height. So let's talk for a moment about the diet industry. They made $72 billion in 2018. That's up from $60 billion in 2016. And that's up from $20 billion in 2012. I have to point out that if this product worked, their profits would go down, not up, because they would actually make people thin. It's based on a repeat business model, and this is really important, and we'll talk about this quite a lot. Most people are able to lose weight for a short amount of time. Almost everyone gains back all of that weight within 2 to 5 years, with up to 2/3 gaining back more than they lost. And if you go and you look at the original founding papers of Weight Watchers, when they very first founded, they knew that. And it was based on a repeat business model. What the diet industry has done brilliantly is to successfully take credit for the short-term biological response, which is the short-term weight loss, and then get people to blame themselves for the second part of the biological response when they regain the weight, and then go back again to the diet industry over and over. And that's why they go from 20 billion to 72 billion. The diet industry both perpetuates and profits from fat phobia. It originally started with advertisements about looks, and then it became also about health. And so they create these messages, the idea that a thinner body is better than a fat body for any number of reasons, and that dieting is the solution. Also, it doesn't work. Again, about 95 to 97% of people gain back their weight. Up to 2/3 of those gain back more than they lost. Results not typical. So a panel of experts convened by the National Institutes of Health acknowledged that no matter what weight loss plan people were following, almost all of them gained back their weight. And just this month, a panel of Canadian healthcare experts announced the exact same conclusion. In fact, studies have shown this going back to at least 1999. We've known this information. I'm going to read this by Wayne Miller because I think it really encompasses the issue. He says, there isn't even one peer-reviewed controlled clinical study of any intentional weight loss diet that proves that people can be successful at long-term significant weight loss. No commercial program, clinical program, or research model has been able to demonstrate significant long-term weight loss for more than a small fraction of the participants. Given the potential dangers of weight cycling, which is yo-yo dieting, and repeated failure, it is unscientific and unethical to support the continued use of dieting as an intervention for obesity, which is to say that even if we believe people would be healthier if they were thinner, we have literally no idea how to safely get that done. And the ideas that we have to get that done risk fat people's lives and quality of life. So if this is true, why do so many people, including healthcare providers, say that weight loss is possible? Well, it starts with research methods. We know, and we've known, again, since at least 1999, that most people lose weight short term and most people gain their weight back long term. So what a lot of studies do is only study a short term. And I came to health at every size through the research. My focus in school was statistical analysis and research methods. And so I was doing the research to find the best diet that won the work that most so that I could do it. And when I read through the literature, what I found was exactly what I've told you, not a single diet where more than a tiny fraction of people succeeded. But beyond that, I found that the research was horrifically, embarrassingly fail out of freshman research methods kind of bad. Studies that said that the intervention was successful, but that had a 70% dropout rate that wasn't accounted for at all. Studies where the average person lost 5 pounds, an amount, by the way, which I could lose right now with like a loofah and a haircut. I don't need 2 years of a weight loss intervention to get that done. And, and then are used to prove that anybody can lose any amount of weight because a certain subset of this study lost 5 pounds in 2 years. Weight Watchers' own research found that people lost 10 pounds in the first year, gained back 5 in the second year, and even though the graph trajectory was going straight up, they simply stopped counting at that point and said, our intervention works because these people were lower than their original weight. This is the kind of science we're talking about. These research methods would not pass muster in a 101 class. So duration, like we talked about, dropout rate, and then questionable conclusions. So the final one, when we look at the weight loss literature, often it's being written up in an article by a journalist, and a lot of things go into that. A 24-hour news cycle that has to be fed. Journalists who may not have time or scientific literacy to be able to read a study and really understand. And so often you'll see an article and all it will talk about are subjects and percentage of body weight. And whenever I see that, my question is always, were these rats? Were these mice? Are we talking about rat and mice experiments as if they're humans? And it's incredibly misleading. And that's beyond the ethical issues with mice and rat experimentation. And then research funding. A lot of times this research is funded by the industry. There was a study years ago that found that obesity costs the workplace $73 billion. And I looked at the study, and I'll spare you the complete analysis, but the punchline is that it was incredibly questionable, and it was funded by Allergan, the makers of the lap band. And it turned out that $73 billion was just a little more than what it would cost to give everyone a lap band. And so they were using this study of incredibly questionable research methods to show that it would be better off if insurance would just cover the lap band. And reporting issues. That study was reported across national media. And again, fat people have enough issues with fat phobia without Allergan designing a study that is created specifically to tell the workplace that we don't show up at work, and when we do, we can't get anything done because we're fat. And so it's incredibly stigmatizing, and this was reported as truth, even though even a cursory look at the research methods would make any freshman who had taken any kind of research methods go, I mean, really? And then outliers. There are a few people who succeed at long-term weight loss, and the National Weight Control Registry tracks them, and out of several billion attempts, they've got 10,000 successes. But people point to outliers and say, well, if they could do it, anyone can. And I think it's important to understand that there are always outliers, and we can never use them to prove the general case. So there are people who survive skydiving accidents even though their chute doesn't open. But that doesn't mean it's okay for me to go and open Ragen School of Parachuteless Skydiving. And even if I studied all of those people and I found out that every single one of them wore a green shirt and ate oatmeal for breakfast, it would not justify opening Ragen School of Parachuteless Skydiving free oatmeal and green shirt with every jump. You cannot use outliers to prove the case. And so that is where we get into the problem. People say, well, my friend's babysitter's first cousin's mom lost a bunch of weight, and so anybody can do it if they try hard enough. That's not how research and science work. If 95% of people gain their weight back and about 2/3 gain back more than they lost, then what we have to say is this has the opposite of the intended effect most of the time. Fat phobia also harms our health. Peter Munig out of Columbia did a series of studies. He found that stigma and prejudice are intensely stressful. And over time, that kind of chronic stress can lead to high blood pressure and diabetes. And in fact, he found correlations to a lot of the same health issues that are correlated to fatness. And it's important to understand as well that we don't know what fat people's health outcomes would be like if we weren't constantly stigmatized and if we weren't encouraged to go on diet after diet after diet after diet our whole lives. And so when we study the effects of so-called fatness on health, we're also studying the effects of constant stigma and typically a lifetime of dieting. He also found that women, and again, this is only cis women, as is typical, trans and non-binary people were completely underrepresented, not represented in these studies, and that's a huge issue, and that needs to be fixed. But he found cis women who say they feel they are too heavy suffer more mental and physical illness than cis women who say they feel fine about their size no matter what they weigh. And so again, we don't know what fat people's health would look like if we stopped stigmatizing them. Health and weight are two separate things. There are healthy and unhealthy people of every weight and size. These are not only fat people diseases. Thin people get the same health issues. And so being thin can neither be a sure preventative nor a sure cure. And we're often using a correlation causation error. So studies are created, often funded by weight loss companies, to prove that being fat is correlated with health issues. But that doesn't mean that we know there's causation. A good parallel is that we know that there's an incredibly high correlation between male pattern baldness and increased cardiac events. Now, if this was treated like weight, what would happen is they would stop the studies there and we would have a national war on baldness. And we would be blaming bald people for going bald, and we would be insisting that they grow back hair, and we would be creating interventions to grow hair on these people because clearly growing hair would be the key to decreasing their rate of heart attacks. But obviously that wouldn't work, and that they didn't do that because they're responsible. And so what they found was that there's a third issue that causes both what's considered male pattern baldness and an increased rate of cardiac incidence. And so the same thing is something we have to look at with weight. Is it stigma? Is it, our internal feelings? Is it the fact that fat phobia gives us worse access to medicine? We can't look at outcomes and compare them until we have similar experiences and access. So let's talk a little about weight and health. Health is multidimensional. It includes things that are within and outside of our control. Health is not a barometer of worthiness regardless. That's just healthism, and that's not a good look. Health is not an obligation. Nobody owes anybody else health or healthy behavior by any definition. And I know this because the National Football League exists. And there's a sport in the Olympics called skeleton. And you go on a sled 80 miles an hour down an ice chute face first. This does not prioritize the health, but people are allowed to do it. But let's be clear. Prioritization of health and the path that someone chooses to get there are intensely personal decisions, and they're not anybody's business unless they ask them to make their business. And they include issues that include access and culture, as including oppression. As I said, racism, public health crisis. And if we don't want to be told what choices we have to make, then we should probably take a pass on telling other people. So now we've looked at that. Let's look at the case for health at every size and weight neutral healthcare. This is going to be the charts and graphs portion. If you're a charts and graphs person, this is going to be your jam. If you're not, I promise to get you through this as quickly and painlessly as I can. So fitness and fatness, the Cooper Institute longitudinal studies, 250,000 records from almost 100,000 individuals representing more than 1.8 million person years of observation, contains more than 3,000 variables. It is the most information on fitness in the world. And Stephen Blair summed it up this way. We've studied this from many perspectives in women and in men, and in this case, again, he means cis women and cis men. And we get the same answer. It's not the obesity, it's the fitness. So this is Way et al. They looked at the relationship between low cardiorespiratory fitness and mortality, and I'm using these categories again with quotes, normal weight, overweight, and obese men. So if we look at the gray bars, this is for men who were not engaged in fitness. And in this study, fitness was 170 minutes of movement a week, so a little bit more than 30 minutes, about 5 times a week. And what they found was there was a decent sized difference based on size. Now, this doesn't mean that that is caused by size for the exact same reasons we just talked about, but that is what they found. There was a difference. When they took fitness into account, what we get is these red bars. which we find there's basically no difference. Once we actually look at the habits, we learn that habits are a much better predictor of future health than is body size. So next we'll talk about Matheson et al. What they looked at was what they called healthy lifestyle habits in overweight and obese individuals. And again, cis men and women, and I'm using those terms in quotes. So the healthy habits they had were 5 or more servings of fruits and vegetables, exercise more than 12 times a month, alcohol up to 1 drink a day for cis women and up to 2 drinks a day for cis men, and not smoking. So here's the graph. Here we have the health hazard ratio, and lower is kind of what you're going for. And then here we have the number of these healthy habits that people were engaged in. You can see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Each group of 3 graphs, we have the first is quote unquote normal weight, classified as overweight, and classified as obese. So as we look at this, again, for people not participating in any of the habits, there was a big difference in health hazard ratio based on size. Again, this is not causal, but there is a difference. Once people started participating in just one of the habits, that compressed quite a bit. Once we get to people who are participating in all 4 of those habits, it compressed almost completely. Again, every time we study actual habits, we find that they are a far better predictor of future health than is body size. So if this is true, why do studies say you can't be fat and fit? Again, research methods. We know that if you study actual habits, you'll get the results I just showed you. If you're not looking to get those results, then you just don't study actual habits. What they do is they'll take data that shows metabolic numbers for people when they were younger and then when they're older. And if it looks like those metabolic numbers become worse over time for people in larger bodies, they'll say, oh, see, this proves you can't be fit and fat. And again, that goes back to research intentions and where the research funding is coming from. And this is something that can be difficult to even find. So you really have to dig if you want this information. And again, subject to reporting issues. Fat people and tax dollars. I get this argument sometimes, but their fat is my business because my tax dollars pay for their health care, blah, blah, blah. My first thing is, well, show me your list then. And by list, I mean the list of things your tax dollars pay for, broken down into things you do and don't want it to pay for, and the interventions you're involved in for all of the things you don't want your tax dollars to pay for. And no one as yet has shown me this list because this isn't what it's actually about for them. Also, who gets to make decisions for you? If someone comes out with a study that shows that another form of eating or exercise than what you choose is more quote unquote healthy or costs fewer tax dollars, are we all required to do that? And fat people pay taxes too. I don't want my taxes to go to $1 billion war on obesity that's simply a war on me for existing, but here we are. Other people live their lives in ways with which we disagree, and we live our lives in ways with which other people disagree. We all deserve health care. And so all this, oh, won't somebody think of my tax dollars, hand-wringing, tends to be nothing but a thin veil for fat phobia and fat bigotry. Adding healthism to sizeism does not make it a better look. Again, health by any definition is not an obligation, a barometer of worthiness, or entirely within our control. I've done both, so I can tell you for sure running a marathon and having a Netflix marathon are morally equivalent activities, and if you're slow enough, both ways to waste an entire Sunday. Fat people have the right to exist without shame, stigma, bullying, or oppression, regardless of why we might be fat, if we could be thinner, and if being thinner would make us healthier. We have the right to exist. People come in lots of different sizes for lots of different reasons. The thing is that neither the sizes nor the reasons are anyone else's business other than to make sure that everyone is accommodated. So why should vegans care about this? Well, size-based oppression is a social justice issue as well. Harmful misinformation about weight and health tends to be prevalent in vegan communities. And that causes issues with welcoming people into those communities, including new vegans. Research finds that people are most likely to be persuaded by people who look like them. And so if fat people look at vegan community and don't see themselves reflected at all, then they're going to tend to believe that vegan community is not for them. And fat vegans deserve a welcoming community. And of course, this works intersectionally. Trans vegans, Black vegans, vegans from marginalized communities deserve a welcoming community where they're represented and they see themselves reflected. So let's talk about how fat people often see themselves represented in vegan culture. Never trust a fat vegan. My question is, with what? Is there, because there is the idea fat vegans here that they must be lying, that it's impossible to be vegan and fat, or like never trust them to dog sit. Like, what are we not trusting fat vegans with? Where do you get your protein? All right, this is a bullshit question. First of all, it's easily answerable with a Google search if you really want to know, but most people don't ask because they really want to know. Most people ask because they're picking a fight. This shouldn't happen. That doesn't justify using fat phobia in this kind of cartoon. There's no reason why the people asking this question need to be fat or why all the vegans are represented as thin-bodied people. This was a PETA ad when the TSA body scans first started. And there are so many things wrong with this, I can scarcely begin. But I will keep myself to the issue that the idea that the only way to be proud of your body scan is to be thin and that going vegan will make you thin is inaccurate and dangerous. Ha, just commented bacon on a vegan post. This is bullshit, indefensible behavior. This should never happen. However, again, there's no reason that this person has to be shown as fat in order to make that point. And the idea that they are doesn't happen without actual intent. Your abs on cheese. Again, there are vegans with abs like this. This idea is really dangerous that if you become vegan, you'll have a specific body size and look. And it's your choice, go vegan. While I'm impressed that that person was able to swallow a whole pumpkin, that's, you don't see that every day. I just don't think this is an accurate representation. It's incredibly stereotypical. And again, it stigmatizes a certain body size, and there's no reason for that. And it's a body size that many vegans have. So this kind of representation is really harmful, both to fat people and to vegan community. So in a survey, I asked fat people what were the overarching messages that they were getting from veganism. And they said a good reason for people to be vegan is so they don't look like you. If you become vegan, it is entirely possible that you will be shamed and stigmatized in vegan community unless and until you become thin. And all good vegans are thin. I want to read some of the lived experience quotes. I faced a lot of pushback from my family and friends when I tried to go vegan. I went to a local vegan meetup to try and find some community. I was the only fat person there. The group leader opened with a fat joke and everyone laughed. I left at the first break and never went back. I gave up going vegan because I didn't think I could do it without support. It was years until I found other fat vegans online and got the support I needed to finally do it. I became vegan before I found fat acceptance when I was dealing with an eating disorder. The encouragement I got from my disordered eating, which had nothing to do with my vegan food choices, which I make for moral reasons, and the extreme fat phobia that I learned and internalized from vegans made it way, way harder to overcome my eating disorder and learn to love my body. I had to leave my vegan group when people said that if you claim to be vegan but were still fat, you were lying, and they decided that I couldn't be in pictures of the group. That community was my whole life. I cried harder than I cried when my mom died. It doesn't have to be this way. And I want to be clear, I know that not all vegans are coming from a place of fat phobia. I just want to make sure that we can identify it so that people can make different choices. So first of all, include fat activism and other social justice activism. Create and center voices of fat people in vegan community. I know, as I said, Chelsea Lincoln's going to be speaking, and she is incredible. Refuse to allow healthism and ableism to drive fat phobia. Refuse to allow the idea that even if fat people have more health problems, even if fat people are more likely to be disabled, that is an okay reason to stigmatize fat people, because that's just taking fat phobia and adding healthism and ableism to it. Create a welcoming community. Representation matters. Make sure that all members of vegan community and all people who you would like to be members of your community see themselves represented on your website, in flyers, in leadership, in everything that you do. Create welcoming events. Making sure events are at places that are disabled accessible, that are fat friendly. So for example, there aren't only chairs with arms that some fat people would be very uncomfortable sitting in, that there's sturdy armless seating, that the place is navigable by someone in a fat body. These things are all really important. If you see something fat phobic, say something against fat phobia. This is a phrase that I use a bit reclaiming because it's so often used to justify Islamophobia, racism, xenophobia. So if we see something that is fat phobic, that is racist, that is Islamophobic, that is xenophobic, that is in any way discriminatory or bigoted, saying something means something. And it doesn't have to be something big. It doesn't have to be a lecture on fat phobia. It can simply be a general statement. Oh, I wish that we lived in a world where all bodies were respected and affirmed. Or I wish we lived in a world without negative body talk. Wouldn't it be amazing if we all had a chance to just love our bodies and take care of them in the ways that we believe? Just a general statement can interrupt that, and you never know who's going to hear that and who it's going to make think and who's going to feel supported and validated that somebody said something. And use your privilege. Privilege can be a tricky subject. When we start talking about privilege, often people start to feel really defensive. This is incredibly common with white privilege, but with thin privilege as well. One of the good uses of privilege is to look around and say, what do I have that this community doesn't just because of this privilege, and what do they want me to do about it? And then do those things. So instead of, going back to the plane example, instead of thinking, I can't believe this fat person thinks that they should get 2 seats for free, wonder, I can't believe this fat person doesn't have the same experience that I do, which is walking onto a plane and having a seat that accommodates me. And what can I do for that? How can I help? So that is that. This is how you can connect with me. If you have any questions or if there's ever anything you want to reach out about, you are very welcome to. I'm going to stop the screen share and turn it back over to Kaylin, and then we will get going with the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Reagan. That was awesome. I am clapping for you. I see Maddie and Eric are clapping too, probably other people. That was awesome. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to hear it live, and I'm excited to rewatch it in the video. So I know we had some pre-registration questions. Maybe we can start with those. And then anyone who has a question that you want to ask live, use the hand raise tool. And if you want to ask it in the chat, feel free to put those in the chat now so we can get them to Reagan.
Cool. I can start with one of the pre-registration questions then. How can I make sure I'm getting the amount of nutrients I need without going to a doctor who will just tell me I'm already eating too much, whether or not I'm actually meeting my nutrient requirements? This is such a great question. It is incredible how often fat people are told to eat less and exercise more by someone who has no idea how much we eat or exercise. And I do a lot of work with an eating disorder community, and this is a huge issue there as well. So I would suggest finding a practitioner, either a dietitian or a doctor who is health at every size based and or intuitive eating based, because they are going to come from a perspective that isn't based on the idea that food and body size are directly related and that you should have less food to have a smaller body, et cetera. All of that is going to be out the window. And one way to find those folks is to go to sizediversityandhealth.org, which is the website of the Association for Size Diversity and Health, and they have a practitioner finder. And so you can enter all of the things that you're interested in and click a button and it will show you all the practitioners there are. And some more and more are practicing virtually, especially now during the time of COVID. So that might be an option for that. And then I think, Evan, if you don't mind weighing in on this, somebody asked, how can I navigate when people say they're vegan only for weight loss? Veganism is not a weight loss diet, so how do I tell them without making them want to give up veganism altogether?
Great, yeah, that's a great question. Also, thanks, Reagan, for your talk. I So I guess I would say, what you should say to a person that has this kind of perspective is obviously going to depend on the context. What's your relationship with this person? When are you talking to them about these issues? As a general rule, I would say on just about anything, be honest and be compassionate. So as far as we're talking, like being honest, I might tell this person, you might lose weight on a vegan diet. It's also, a really good chance that you would not lose weight on a vegan diet. In fact, research suggests that that is the most likely outcome. However, probably part of the reason why you're interested in trying to lose weight is because you care about your health. There are like real health benefits that you could get from eating a plant-based diet, whether or not you lose weight. And, there's lots of other great reasons to be interested in eating plant-based diets. You can try to have a conversation with them. Not every benefit is going to speak to everybody, right? Some people don't care about animals. I mean, I think a lot of people care about animals somewhere in their heart. Some people don't care about the environment, but, you can talk about these things and see if you have a kind of shared connection on any of those issues. So that would be my advice.
Thanks. That's, I think, great advice. I just want to add to that, when you find out that someone is vegan only for weight loss, it is a bit of a chance to kind of inoculate them against the almost inevitable, because the chances are, even if they lose weight short term, they're going to gain it back. And so that can cause them to give up veganism altogether, if that was the only reason. And so giving them information, oh, did you know that, a lot of people, their bodies don't end up changing, or they might gain their weight back. But as Evan said, there's health benefits that, let's talk about animal rights. So you can kind of inoculate people by giving them more information, even if that's their sort of entryway into vegan community. All right, do we have hands up? Becca.
Hi, thank you so much. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how to have conversations about food and health, and maybe thinking even about how to talk about food and health with kids. Because often we try to simplify the language to this is good for you, or this is bad for you, or even just this is healthy versus unhealthy has stigma associated with it. So how do we have kind of simplified messaging, both for ourselves as adults and also if we're thinking about teaching kids about nutrition?
That's a really good question. And it is an issue to create morality around food in terms of healthy and not healthy. And it's a different kind of morality than we talk about with plant-based diets. Because when you tell people this food is good and this food is bad, it affects their relationship with food. It can create the situations that perpetuate eating disorders. And so it's something to really look at. So, the difference between I eat this food versus I don't eat this food for these moral reasons, rather than this food is good or this food is bad, especially as it relates to, say, sugar or fat or caloric content, those kind of things. You just want to be really neutral with kids around food. And if the reasonings are something other than just, the nutritional content of the food, that's important to talk about. But you want to also make sure that whoever you're talking to, you're not moralizing food because it might, for example, make you fat or make you less fat, or make you healthy or make you less healthy. I tend to use words like supporting your body. Oh, I eat this food because it supports my body. And I eat this food because I like it and it's fun. And, it depends on how far you want to dig down, because we hear a lot about like, oh, this food is nutritionally devoid, but in fact, it's not. Whenever anybody says sugar has no nutritional value, I'm like, oh, you've never run a marathon, right? Because at mile 24, sugar has an incredible amount of nutritional value. They're called macronutrients for a reason: carbs, fat, and protein. And so everything is a nutrient in some way or another. It's not that the food is empty, but maybe it doesn't make you feel as good, or maybe, you know, it doesn't support you, and everybody's health is different. It's with Matheson, for example, they talked about, oh, you know, eating 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. There are people with health conditions for whom that is the worst advice. They would be in a horrible situation if they ate 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. So it's important to understand individual stuff too. But I think especially when we're talking to kids, keeping away from words like good or bad or fattening, you know, or that kind of thing, and just talk about like why you eat certain foods at certain times for certain reasons, I think can be really helpful. Does that help?
Reagan, I think you're muted.
Oops, looking again for hands up. Marty.
Hi, it's actually Marty's husband, Tony. But thank you. This is a good presentation, and I really liked you calling out the points about how research is funded, because that's always something that I bring up to people to make sure to pay attention to. But I did have a question about, so you were saying like the different terminologies around like fat, obesity, and person of size. So I was like trying to wrap my head around like how that may be a little bit appropriative of person of color, where it would come from, because like I can't lose weight and not be Black, but I could lose weight and not be a person of size, or am I still considered a person of size if I lost the weight? So like how does that terminology, like, I guess, not be appropriative? Because I feel like in the Michigas it seems as such, so I don't know.
I hear you. It may well be appropriative. And person of size isn't a constant like person of color would be, because if someone, even if they got an illness that caused them to lose weight, person of size typically means a larger person. So it probably is better to use a larger or heavier person. Person of size, I think, probably did gain its popularity because of person of color, and because it's seen as a more neutral way than to say obese or overweight, but definitely appropriation is an issue there. With all of those terms, besides the appropriation, with larger bodied or heavier, there's an issue with suggesting that thin is the normal, the standard, and then judging fat bodies based on that. It's one of the reasons I like fat. I'm just fat, as opposed to not thin, rather than saying I'm more than thin or greater than thin or bigger than thin. So all of those terms are tricky, but yeah, the appropriation there is real, and I appreciate you pointing it out. I hadn't thought of it that way before, and I'm grateful.
Oh, I
No
think
other hands up at the moment, so sorry, I keep muting myself and then talking, which is not a particularly effective tool for communication. Moving on to the Google Doc for a couple questions. I heard that being fat increases your chance of dying from COVID. Is that true? This is really complicated, and I don't want to get too far into it, but one of the first things that was discussed in this was the city of New Orleans. And they said 25% of the deaths coming out of New Orleans are quote unquote obese people. Therefore, obesity proves that there's a higher risk of death from COVID. What they didn't say was that 34% of people in New Orleans are classified as obese. So 34% of people are in the category, but only 25% of deaths. The only conclusion you can draw from that is that being fat is protective, because they're underrepresented in the death rates. And that is what I mean when I say elementary mistakes in the science. It's possible that being fat increases your risk of dying. It's, I think, more likely that the unequal access to medical care increases your risk of dying. Like with H1N1, the study showed, oh, there's a disproportionate risk of dying if you're fat, but what they found out was they didn't inoculate fat people as soon as they did thin people. And so fat people died more because of a disparity of care. A lot of hospitals don't even have beds that accommodate fatter people. A lot of medical schools don't include fat cadavers. So Doctors are often not even practicing on fat people until they're in practice. The tools are made for thin people. The beds are made for thin people. Often when you go in for a regular health checkup, they won't even have a blood pressure cuff that fits you. So if we can't get a blood pressure cuff, what are the chances that we can get complex care for an emerging health condition? So it might increase the risk of death, but to blame fatness, I think, is a huge disservice and is probably not what's actually driving the issue there. Hand up. Marty, another question. Marty and Tony, another question, or just hand is still up?
Yeah, it's actually Marty this time. Hey, nice
Hey,
to meet
Marty.
you. Thank you so much. I have been talking with Caitlin a lot about you and about acceptance. My question was really more like, I'm about to open up a like healthcare practice, specifically like a plant-based one. And I was just wondering if I could get, like, you're not a monolith, but what you would like to see going in, if you were going to go in and see somebody, like, what are you looking for as a patient that would make you feel comfortable and accepted and cared for?
First of all, congrats.
Thanks.
And thank you for caring about these things. A couple of things that I think of in terms of healthcare practices. The first is a comfortable office. That, you know, there's sturdy armless chairs that I can sit in. The magazines and the art aren't all about weight loss. The art has representation of, you know, fatter people. Certainly no before and after weight loss pictures. You know, you see that sometimes and it is so disheartening. So I don't imagine that you would do that, but just to say it out loud, not that. And then, you know, maybe something on the wall that talks about bodies of all sizes are respected. Maybe, you know, a health at every size poster, something like that, that makes it clear. When I was at the University of Texas many moons ago as a student, I helped start the Safe Space program. And it was the mid-90s in Texas, which was an interesting time to be out and gay. And what we realized was that students were looking for just a book on the wall, anything that might suggest that a professor was safe to talk to about this. And so all we did was create a little sticker that said, I'm an ally with a rainbow. And then I did training for faculty and staff, but it made a world of difference because it was just a clear thing. This is a place. I have some knowledge, and more to the point, I have it in my heart to be here for this. And so I think that it's a similar thing. You know, if I walk into a healthcare practice and there's a picture of a fat person or there's something on the wall that talks about all sizes are respected, that it means the world to me. So like you said, I'm not a monolith, but for me, those are the things I would think about.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it may not mean anything to, like, say, a thin person who came in and it's just like, oh, they don't even notice it, but you're absolutely right. Just like for the people that it matters for, we'll notice it.
Yeah, and from experience in working with a lot of registered dietitians, for thin people, they'll sometimes express surprise outright to you, like, oh, I'm really surprised to see pictures of fat people on the wall. And that's a really nice little educational opportunity. Like, oh yeah, a lot of people, you know, think that for some reason my job would be about making people thin, but that's not it at all. And so it can be like a little bit of allyship that can be done there. But yeah, in a lot of cases, they're not going to notice it at all, but the person who is looking for it will.
And I did have just like one like side thing, like back to what Tony was saying. Sorry, he actually just stepped in the other room to use the bathroom. Like I think the way he was trying to get across to you is maybe to change your verbiage, if that makes sense. Like rather than just acknowledge that, oh, it came from like person of color, but like maybe change the thing. Like, of course, it's your presentation. It's just something to point out. And it seems like you're really inclusive and are trying to like bring in a lot of like acceptance of other things.
Yeah, I apologize if I didn't make that clear. I was clear on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I, you know, in this point have been very now thinking about not using that term.
Okay,
so
awesome. Thank you so much.
No, I
really awesome.
totally got that, and I apologize for not making that clear.
Oh, no problem.
Thank you. Maddie?
Hi. So I recognize that you cannot fix everything because that would be impossible. However, I'm a member of a couple vegan and vegetarian groups on Facebook, and you would probably believe how many posts I see that are just, okay, I just started being vegan, but I'm not losing any weight. What am I doing wrong? And I'm just like, it's not a weight loss diet. And then I get into the health at every size. And then all of a sudden I'm barraged by a ton of people being like, I'm so heavy. There's no way I could be healthy at this size. And it's like a personal thing for them. And it's just like, how do you combat that when you want to respect other people, but also it's really harmful for them to have that view for themselves?
That's really rough. And I'm grateful for the work that you're doing in those communities, but it's really a tough thing to do. I think for me, it's always about presenting options. Everything in my life is about presenting options. There are paths to health other than attempting to manipulate your body size, and you can love your body no matter what. Those are the options I want people to have. Whether or not they take those options, I can't take that on. Because if I did, I would be, I would be unable to move forward because it's just so much. So my goal is always, here's another way of thinking. Maybe you adopt it, maybe you don't. That's not on me. But I want to make sure I get the information out. So, you might create a copy and paste of, if you haven't already, of like the information. Here's some thoughts and here's a bunch of resources. And then you might not go back to that conversation. I have a group on Facebook, a secret group called Rolls Not Trolls. And our goal is to put body positive things into body negative conversations on the internet. And so somebody will say, oh, this is a cesspool, and we all go and we all comment. But our deal is we never, ever go back. I don't want to spend my time arguing with people who are absolutely committed to hating me. That's not going to be helpful for me. But I want people who read through it, because you may not change the poster's mind, but who knows who will see it and who will be helped by that information. So that's what I do, if that helps from my perspective, is I try to present the information and I don't take responsibility for whether or not they choose to engage with it.
Yeah, I get into a lot of back and forth, and they're just like, well, you didn't have anything to combat that. I'm like, I'm not a dictionary.
Yeah.
I don't know, encyclopedia.
Right. And I'm not obligated to give someone education for free on the internet. And so John Robeson, who's one of the founders of this movement, we were talking about debating, because he and I both get asked to do these debates a lot. And he said, this is what the other person says is everything you've heard, it was right. And what we have to say in the same amount of time is everything you know is misinformation. Let's start from the bottom and build it up. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And so I think what we really need is just more people doing it. So if every time in those communities somebody said that, a bunch of people would post information, it would be incredibly helpful. And there would be more and more people who saw that information. It would become more saturated. And again, that's another great place for ally work if you don't happen to be a fat person. So I think that would be a great idea too, but just to keep giving that information out and make it more and more prevalent. And the Canadian doctors, so this group of Canadian healthcare practitioners, all of whom have a profit interest in weight loss, came out with these standards. And the standards, they're not good. What it was basically they admitted what they couldn't deny, and then they denied what they couldn't admit. And what they couldn't deny was these diets aren't working for anybody. And we've known since 1999. And I consider that a victory for fat activists, because we've been saying this for decades now. And the research has been there, but finally they couldn't deny it anymore. The number of people saying this out loud became too much. And so online activism can be that way as well. Cool. Jeff?
Hi there. Thanks so much. This has been really helpful and great information, a lot of great takeaways. I live in Taiwan, and anytime I post anything about fatphobia and fat shaming in the vegan community, a lot of particularly women message and tell stories of how they're constantly shamed very publicly by relatives, usually men,
who feel that it is appropriate to comment on their weight. You know, seeing them, oh, you've gained so much weight since the last time I've seen you. At a vegan festival that I participated in not very long ago, a male vendor actually asked a female vendor to step outside of her stand. She didn't know what he was going to say, twirl around, and then said, "You've been eating too many of your cakes. It looks like you need to go on a diet." And this is very prevalent in the culture here. And I get so many DMs of people just saying they're just so frustrated and stressed by all the pressure that they have from families, even mothers telling them that you need to lose weight or you're never going to get a husband, or if you don't lose weight, you're going to lose your husband, and things like this. And I know it's a little different than in some other cultures and the like, but you know, just frustration from them and how to deal with this. And particularly, it's so prevalent in the Taiwanese vegan community about being fit and thin, and you know, and the like. And I don't know if you have anything, you know, in terms of kind of ways to or suggestions for these type of situations.
Wow, yeah. So in terms of empowering people, I think giving people the phraseology like, oh, I wasn't aware you were monitoring my body. It makes me uncomfortable. Don't do it. And at the very least, it's not acceptable to talk to me about it. So giving people some boundary setting language can help in terms of greater, because especially with friends and family, it can be really tough. Dealing with friends and family is one of the hardest things to do. And so I try to use a 3-step boundary setting process, which is set the boundary, name the boundary, preferably in a neutral moment, name the consequence. And it can be something really simple, like I'm just going to take my plate to the other room, or it can be I'm going to leave and we'll try again next holiday or whatever, and then follow through. So helping people with that kind of language and that kind of process, I think, can be helpful individually, and also making it clear, this is not your fault. And this is the thing with fat phobia. It's not our fault. It becomes our problem, but it's not our fault. Fat bodies existing is not the problem. Fat phobia existing is the problem. And we might have to deal with it, but this shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't have to take skills classes to exist in the world and be treated poorly. And then in terms of ally work and community, the more that you can create communities that say, this is unacceptable. So that if it were happening at a vegan event and someone did that, the crushing disapproval from everyone around would be so swift. And that person who it happened to would feel so supported. And secondarily, hopefully the person who did it would either be educated or shamed enough not to do it again. I think, you know, I hope that people get educated. I hope that people dismantle their own fat phobia. But for right now, I'll take shut up as an appropriate intermediary step. And that's the thing, you know, in terms of doing queer and trans activism from way back, like that was an intermediary step. Like you can be as homophobic as you want, but not here. You can't say it here. And that was an intermediary step. And so I think in this sort of same as a queer fat woman, and I want to be clear, comparing oppressions is tricky because they come from different places. They privilege different people in different ways. So I would never compare oppressions that I don't actually hold. But as a woman who's both fat and queer, I see those parallels in my own activism. So just the more that we're all educating ourselves that fat phobia is a social justice issue and that it's unacceptable and that we're going to support someone. And it can be hard for the person being supported, especially if they have a lot of internalized fat phobia, because they can have the idea that they deserve this treatment. And we're taught that the solution to fat phobia is to change ourselves, right? Well, if you change yourself to please your bully, then this won't happen to you anymore. Basically, well, if you give the bully your lunch money, maybe they'll stop beating you up. And the truth is, first of all, the bully doesn't deserve my lunch money. And second of all, we all know once we give them the lunch money, they're just going to beat us up for something else. So the bully's the problem. But because our culture has this idea that if you don't like fat phobia, you should become thin, people internalize that. Fat people internalize that. And we see it, you know, because most of us yo-yo diet, we have that short-term weight loss, we see how much better we're treated. And we remember everything that people said to us. When we gain the weight back, we remember people saying how much better we looked, you know, how much more attractive we were. We remember all of it. And so we have all that. So when in supporting someone, try to make it a general support and not about this person, so that they're not having to take on that burden in that moment when they've just been the victim of something already. So more general. We don't treat people like that here. You know, that kind of thing. All right, more hands. Shall we go back to the Google Doc? Let me answer a couple from the Google Doc, and then we'll go back to hands. Oh, hey. So this one, let me toss to Evan and Kaylin. So many vegan documentaries feature weight loss and cures of fat diseases like diabetes. Does anyone have any resources that might not showcase this?
All right. Hey, everybody. So there's not a documentary that Evan and I are aware of that does not have this issue, but I'll let Evan say a little bit more in a moment. But one of the things that I'm so excited about for this event, and all of us being here today, or whoever's watching the video later, is us being here is a part of changing the culture. So hopefully as future documentaries come out, we won't have that problem. I mean, one of the reasons we're so happy and thankful to have Ragen here with us, and I've been working with her for the last 6 months, almost 7 months, is because fatphobia is just rampant in our community. And as Jeff mentioned, in the Taiwanese vegan community as well. So we're not aware of any documentaries, but if we keep doing the work that has been started here tonight, hopefully in the near future, we will be able to list a documentary.
That's funny. I was going to say something very similar. I think Kaylin and I think the same way. Someone go make that documentary. Oh, one clarification I'll add is if you find documentaries that don't really touch on health, well, then you're good. There won't be the fat phobia there. If you've got like a purely animal rights or like environmental message.
And hey, make your own. I would watch the CVC documentary for real. So moving on to the next question, you say that health isn't a moral obligation, but don't we have an obligation to our partners and families to be as healthy as possible? I hear this question a lot. I want to start with the idea of as healthy as possible. Especially in the US, we tend to believe that health is something that is binary, like you are or you are not healthy. And the truth is that health is such a striation of things. And again, we're not in control of all of them. Beyond which, we don't owe healthy to anyone. So you may make an agreement with a partner, with a spouse, that this is something that the two of you agree on, or the three of you, or however many, if you happen to be in a poly group. But you're not obligated to do that. And to ask that can be very healthist. And it suggests that perhaps this person only loves you if you meet certain qualifications of health. And the thing with body size, with health, with ability and disabilities, it can change rapidly, sometimes in a second. And so one of the things, like Jeff had said, you won't find a husband if you're fat. As a queer person, the husband thing wasn't real important to me, but the idea that you won't find a partner who wants you, that to me was a good filter. I don't want to be dating or married to someone who's a fat phobe, because who knows what will happen to my body in the future. And so sometimes I hear people make these arrangements like, I promise that I'll always be attractive to you, where attractive is rooted in a stereotype of beauty that is rooted in thinness and whiteness, cis het able-bodiedness. And the truth is, maybe we should be dismantling that, and maybe what we should instead be promising is, I will always work on my skill set to perceive beauty so that it includes you. I will take responsibility for the ways that I have internalized a stereotype of beauty that's rooted in tremendous oppression and discrimination, and I will dismantle that. and make that promise to each other rather than a promise to health or rather than a promise to some sort of able-bodiedness or some sort of size or aesthetic look. But no, we don't owe health to anybody. But people get to make choices, so nobody owes us being with us. And that's important to understand. You know, I heard from someone recently who said, you know, my husband isn't taking care of his health and I don't know if I can, you know, be along for this ride and I want him to do these things. That's, in a relationship like that, that's an honest conversation you have to have. But you also have to look from yourself, what about me feels like he owes me these specific behaviors and actions? So we all have to be dismantling that all the time, because healthism, sizeism, ableism, it's constant in our culture. We're getting it all the time. And so we have to all the time be recognizing and dismantling it. Other hands up. Emily.
Hi, can you see me?
Hi.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. I was like audibly cheering and snapping for you as you were speaking. I'm kind of nervous because I feel like everyone's eyes are on me now. But my question was basically, I have a lot of friends who are in bodies larger than my own. And this is like health at every size and intuitive eating is something that I speak out about. But I have a lot of friends in larger bodies than my own who have internalized fat phobia. Because in parallel to them, I do have some thin privilege, and I feel it's like awkward. Like I don't want to put myself as like educating you on an issue about your own body kind of thing. And I always feel like I don't know where to go from here. And I wonder if you had any suggestions.
Sure. And your dog is adorable.
Thank you.
So I had to get that out of the way first. I'm focused. All right. Yeah. So first of all, thank you for wanting to do that. It's important work. And this is where centering the voices of other fat people can be really helpful. So whether you do it directly, like, hey, I read this thing or I went to this talk and like, here's, you know, the video from it if you want to watch it, you know, it reminded me of some conversations that we've had, or whether you just do it more passively, like on your social media. You know, are you sharing fat voices on your social media? And again, Chelsea Lincoln, incredible fat vegan voice. So if you're making sure that you're constantly sharing this information, then they have a chance to see it and internalize it without feeling personally attacked or like preached at from somebody who doesn't necessarily know the experience that they're having. So that's my suggestion would be center the voices of fat people and just offer it, again, options. Hey, read this, thought you might be interested.
That's great. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Oh, you're muted, Ragen.
Dang it. Maddie. Oops, you're muted, Maddie. I'm contagious now.
I did not actually have another question, but let me just tell you that this entire presentation has given me so much life. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I'm really glad. Let's see. How can the O word be considered a slur when it's a medical term and doctors still use it? Because doctors created the problem. Fat people get to choose how we want to be identified. And for fat activists, terms that pathologize and medicalize our body size aren't it. And I also want to point out that they're not really used across the board. So it's a ratio of weight and height. And because it's a two-dimensional ratio in a three-dimensional world, without getting too much into the math, it skews for taller people. So taller people will be obese at a lower ratio because of the type of measurement. We also, you know, anytime you say obesity creates a greater risk for this, you're also talking about a ton of athletes. And so if you don't think, for example, The Rock is at greater risk for COVID because of his body size, then you can't really say obesity creates a risk. So often we're using, not we, because not me, but often people are using obesity when what they mean is fat people. And they use it as a cover. So these terms are not helping anybody, but they're hurting a lot of people, which is why even if they're used in medical literature. And I want to point out, medicine is a practice, and medicine gets it wrong. Heroin was once prescribed as a non-addictive substitute for morphine. Oops. Medicine gets it wrong. And what's happened with weight and health is just a stubborn refusal to admit that doctors are wrong, even though there are incredible studies. There's the 1999 study, there's Miyama 2007 and 2013 that did full literature reviews and found this information, and made it very clear. And so for some reason, medical science has forgotten how to say oops, even though that is a base of science. So that's part of the issue as well, I think. How do I unlearn or stop thinking fat phobic things? That's a hard one because, again, it's everywhere. So getting in the habit of reading a lot of fat positive things, different bloggers, following Instagram accounts, getting that kind of information flow to you all the time so you're reminded at least a little bit close to as often as you are reminded by, diet ads that come in and fat phobic information that comes in can be really helpful. Creating a mantra can be really helpful. My mantra is, hey, that's bullshit, but other people choose. I know somebody who does nope, 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 or other things, but it's basically when you see something that comes in that's fat phobic, you think that mantra right away, right? So you see the billboard for whatever freezing off the fat and you go, oh, hey, that's bullshit. And I can tell you at this point, it's subconscious. So it's like an exoskeleton of bullshit detection so that it never really even gets to my brain because my brain has already been like, oh, that's bullshit. So creating that mantra to make yourself clear on what's true and what is a cultural stigma that's just been ingrained and is now repeated and creates a lot of profit for a lot of people, I think is a really good first step. Another good first step is to stop engaging in negative body talk of any kind, including your own body. And that can take some time. It was the first step for me in my own journey to loving my body was I wrote down this big list of everything I could think of that my body did for me. And I got like granular breathing, blinking, heartbeat, waist management. And whenever I would start to have a negative thought about my body, I'd interrupt it consciously and I would replace it for gratitude from the list. Anything from the list. It didn't have to be one for one because I couldn't be like, oh, I hate this body, but like, no, I love it. That felt disingenuous to me. And so I would be like, I hate this body. No, thank you for breathing. You're doing a great job. I forgot my keys 3 times today. So if I was in charge of breathing, I would be dead. It's like, I really appreciate that you just get that done. Breath in and breath out. And it sounds hokey because it probably is, but after 3 months of doing this, it fundamentally changed my relationship with my body. Because I started to view my body as a friend and as a partner. And I would never have let anyone treat any of my friends the way I let people treat my body and the way I talked about my own body. I would have thrown down if people talked about my friends like they talked about my body and when I would agree and laugh and make a self-deprecating joke. And so that was a huge part for me. And then the second step is not to engage in negative body talk in life. And that might mean just walking away from conversations, right? Hey, look, cake, and just wander away. Or it might mean saying something like we talked about, oh, I wish that we didn't spend so much time talking badly about other people's bodies. Or it might be that you really want to educate the person. Let me send you some information about how harmful this kind of talk is. It depends on you, how you feel, your relationship with the person, the situation. But if a bunch of us just stop talking negatively about bodies, and then that next step is to create an affirming space. So we talk a lot about creating weight neutral spaces, strong, sturdy chairs and nothing, fat negative, but then we take that step to creating fat affirming spaces. And that might be a healthcare practitioner's office. It might be our game night that we have with our friends on Zoom. We don't do this. We're not going to, say negative things about what other people are eating because of the sugar content or fat content or wherever. We're not going to say negative things about other people's bodies. This is a body affirming space. And then starting to speak out. So it can go in stages. But starting with negative body talk and starting with having gratitude for our own bodies. And then after that body gratitude list, starting to think about other people. So if you see someone and you can't see the beauty in them, and I alluded to this earlier, but I believe the ability to perceive beauty is a skill set. And most of us are woefully underskilled because we've been taught that this is beautiful and you can see it and you can know it, and it's thin, white, cis, het, able-bodied. And anything beyond that, you know, is not beautiful. And the truth is, it's just that we don't have the skill set to see it yet. So if we see someone and we, for some reason, don't find them attractive, start asking questions. What about this person don't I find attractive? Who profits from that belief? Where did I get that from? Because a lot of times we'll hear people say, oh, it's just how I am. It's just what I'm attracted to. But somehow it just happens to magically align with our culture stereotype of beauty. These things don't happen in a vacuum, and we have a responsibility to dismantle those things and to increase our skill set and our ability to perceive beauty in the world and in people. Let's see, looking. Emily again? Oh, wait. Chelsea?
Hi, thanks so much for this talk, Ragen. It's so amazing. Thank you for your time for this. I did want to ask a question about kind of dealing with intersectional spaces that exclude talking about fat acceptance and fat liberation. And if you have any like thoughts or tips on kind of going about that and trying to, you know, I don't want to overstep, but I also don't want to be silent. So sometimes it's kind of a hard balance figuring out how to respond to, you know, fat phobia in those spaces, especially when it's something more subtle, like someone wanting to talk about weight loss.
It can be tough, and it depends on the space. When you say, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by an intersectional space and that exclude? Are you saying that they don't allow fat positive talk in this particular space, or?
It's more a matter of, I mean, I can give a specific example, but I mean, I've seen it in a few different places, but like an intersectional vegan group, let's say, that you know, someone's talking about wanting to share their weight loss story on their personal page and wanting some tips on how to go about that in a respectful way. And a lot of the responses are more of like, don't worry about what other people do. It's your page, do what you want. Don't worry about trigger warning. If they, you know, there's lots of bullies out there that might disagree. If they think it's fat shaming, then that's on them. You know, those type of responses.
Sorry, I didn't want to unmute for a second. Got it. Yeah, so here again, I think presenting options can be really helpful. So just having anyone in the conversation be like, actually, this can be really harmful to people, not just people in larger bodies, but also people who are dealing with or might develop or are recovering from eating disorders. So, you know, some basic politeness, you're allowed to do whatever you want with your body, but like some basic politeness might be to have a trigger warning, to nest any before and after pictures, to make clear that bodies of all sizes are valid and worthy and nobody should be forced to lose weight to be accepted. You know, to acknowledge that if you're celebrating, for example, shopping in quote unquote normal clothing stores, you should point out that what you're celebrating is that you have at least temporarily moved yourself out of an oppressed group. And that the oppression is still a problem and everyone should get this access to clothes, not just people who happen to currently be thinner. When people in my timeline celebrate weight loss, my standard response is, especially with a before and after picture, I think you look amazing at any size. And if you happen to be one of the people who gain the weight back, just remember that you're valid and worthy at every size. And then I just let it go. So that can be helpful. It depends, and it depends on your relationship to the group. So groups get to have the rules that they have. So I was recently invited to a group that was like, we're here for body liberation, and if you're trying to lose weight, we're all behind you. And I was like, nope, that is not the group for me. But that's their group, and they're allowed to create that group, and I don't have to be part of it, for which I am grateful. So respecting the group rules is important, but also sometimes it can help to reach out to the mods and say, is there a way that we can do this that isn't so harmful to people? Like a lot of people don't understand how they're being harmful. Is this a conversation we can have? And they may say yes or no. But if you have the time and the energy to do that kind of request and that kind of education, that can be helpful. Otherwise, I am a fan of the copy and paste response to those things. You know, here's a blog about how before and after pictures are harmful. Here's some information about how they trigger eating disorders. You know, this is some stuff we should think about before we're posting this on our page. And like the least you can do is a trigger warning kind of thing.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your insight.
Cool, sure. I'm trying not to fangirl. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be cool, but I'm not because Chelsea Lincoln. All right, I'm focused. Any other hands up? I can go back to the Google Doc. We got a couple questions still there. Is it fat phobic if I don't care about other people's weight, but I want to lose weight myself? All right. There is no way to say that in any case, a thinner body is better than a fat body without perpetuating fat phobia. That's just the reality. That's what fat phobia is, to say a thinner body is better than a fat body, whether it's just your own body, all bodies, some bodies. A lot of times people will put a limit on it. It's okay to be fat as long as, you know, you're quote unquote healthy, you have some kind of mobility. It's another way to sort of fold in healthism and ableism. The truth is it's okay to be fat, period. And so you can't engage in weight loss without, to some degree, perpetuating fat phobia. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to engage in weight loss. It's your body. And understanding that the most likely outcome is going to be that you end up heavier than you started. It can be really important to be clear about that as well. Like you're rolling the dice and that's your choice. Other oppressions can also come into this. For example, Roxanne Gay, who is a fat, Black, disabled woman, decided to have weight loss surgery. And she said clearly, look, there are oppressions that I can't escape from, but here's one that I can. And so I want to do that. I have, as a person with white and able-bodied privilege, no right to judge that at all. No right to speak on that other than to provide her with my support. And she was very clear about that. And she risked her life. The weight loss surgeries, people die, and many people have horrific lifelong side effects that they would give anything to take back the surgery. And so she went into that eyes wide open, made that choice, and I have nothing but respect for her and her choice, and I have no right to comment on that. My feelings about it don't matter as somebody with much more privilege than she has. But how someone reacts after they start losing weight, at least temporarily, is important. Are they posting before and after pictures that make it clear? Like, just in case you didn't know, I think a thinner body is better than a fatter body. If you look like this or fatter, like, I'm talking to you especially. That matters. If they're celebrating their newly found thin privilege, oh, I finally got to shop at a normal store, and it was so amazing, and, you know, that's an issue. That's perpetuating more fat phobia. So how somebody chooses to deal, like there's the option to not talk about it, right? It is actually possible to choose to try to manipulate your body size and then not talk about it. That's an option that does far less perpetuation of fat phobia. There's an option if people ask to say, look, my body's my business, I'd prefer you not monitor it, and bodies of all sizes are valid. That's an option. And our culture, we celebrate it so much, and it's such a way, you see it with stars who tend to be heavier, but then they just keep losing weight and they'll get a ton of publicity for it, and then they'll gain the weight back and then they'll lose weight and they get a ton of publicity for it. And then my personal pet peeve is when they're at their heaviest, all of a sudden they're fat advocates and they're body positive advocates and they're co-opting our language and they're using our communities, and then they lose the weight and now they're, you know, spewing the same diet culture stuff that they were talking against previously. It's incredibly frustrating to me. And that's my personal pet peeve. But there's, you know, the choice is going to be fat phobic in its nature to try to make your body smaller because you believe that would be better for any reason. But then what happens next also matters. And how you handle that also matters. Looking for other hands up and don't see any. What kind of legislation can people support that aligns with fat activism? So there are a lot of pieces of legislation that are being floated around that add height, weight, size to anti-discrimination laws, and that is incredibly helpful. In California, I did as a small part of a group that did incredible work around the way that we're handling COVID patients, because the rationing protocols were incredibly ableist, incredibly ageist, incredibly sizist in terms of who was going to get care if there were shortages of equipment or faculty and staff. And so we were able to get those changed. So for the first time ever, the state of California has a state guideline that includes weight in its protected classes, that they cannot deny COVID treatment based on weight or ability or age. So working on those kinds of campaigns, and now with COVID happening, with people creating situations where it's getting worse and worse, there's more that those conversations are still being had about rationing protocols. So learn about what's happening with rationing protocols in my state. What are the protocols? And this not only is about fat activism, but also about disability activism, ageism. There's a lot of people in categories. And all of this goes back to people of color because of the ways that discrimination are interlaced. So all of these types of discrimination are actually discrimination against people of color. So this work is incredibly impactful across a number of communities. All right, looking for hands one more time. If you have a question, do throw a hand up. Let's see. This one, so how is health at every size any different than people who are anti-mask? Aren't you both saying you can just ignore the CDC based on your own beliefs? No. This question is coming up more and more, or how is health at every size any different than QAnon? Like, because it's an evidence-based health paradigm, it's not a conspiracy theory. The fact that the majority of culture is against it doesn't make it wrong or right. What I'm saying is, you know, if all of the evidence goes against the CDC approach, then probably we should take a look at that, not just ignore the CDC and do whatever, you know, your friend Ed thinks is the best idea for public health. Those are two different things. And it's a way that people try, they're online trolls. This is what they do. And it's a way that they try to manipulate the discussion, to take health at every size, which is something that very learned people have done tremendous research on, and try to say it's the same thing as QAnon or anti-mask people, as a way to try to minimize it. Because like this is their life goal. I wish I understood why they chose this, but they're out there and this is what they do. And so it's, you know, it's a way that people try to minimize what is a movement for fat liberation and appropriate evidence-based healthcare. All right, any others? And then I've got one final question here, but I want to make sure that I've got everybody's questions answered. Y'all have been in for the long haul, by the way. Thank you for listening to this and for listening through the Q&A. I'm grateful. Maddie?
Yes, one more from me.
Yeah, go.
So recognizing that health is, or that health problems are not because of being fat, is it also, well, I guess this implies that there is a choice to lose weight. But say that you have joint problems, you actually would feel better if you did not have as much weight on those joints. What do you say to someone who wants to lose weight because their joints hurt?
One of the most popular, oh, sorry, go ahead. No, this is a question that gets asked a lot. One of the most popular blog posts I ever wrote was called Fat People and Our Knees. This is, especially as an athlete in dance and now in endurance sports, this comes up a lot. So here's the deal. First of all, when you're a thinner person who has, we'll use knee pain as an example. They give you all kinds of things you could do to improve that knee pain: massage, strengthening the muscles around it, physical therapy, ultraviolet, like there's a lot of things you can do. When you're fat, they tend to tell you the only thing you could do is lose weight. And that's not true. All those other things work for fat people too. And so my tendency if I'm dealing with a doctor who is pushing weight loss is to say, let's try all the other things first and see what happens. Often knee pain is just about a muscular imbalance or an issue with muscles that can be solved through physical therapy or massage. So there's that part. Have you done all the other things? And then there's the fact that, again, the majority of people gain back more weight than they lost. So if we think that weight is a problem, intentional weight loss is the worst advice we can give somebody, because we're going to make what we think the problem is worse. Not to mention that if you're having joint problems, it can be pretty hard even to get that temporary short-term weight loss, since movement can be really painful and difficult. And here's another thing that really upsets me. So early intervention with joint issues is key. So if someone starts having a little pain in their knee, they go to the, doctor, the physical therapist, and they say, okay, and they do these things, and like within a couple weeks, it's better. But if you're fat, they say, well, try losing, it's always 50 pounds. It doesn't seem to matter how much you weigh. I don't know what that is, but try losing X amount of weight and then see if that's better. So the joint problem is getting worse that whole time. And now when you do go in for treatment, you're starting from a worse place. And that's also what they find in the research around joint replacements. In fact, fat people have the same benefits as thin people do with joint replacements, but they make fat people wait longer. So we go in worse, but they don't take that into account because they just start from surgery. If we got the same interventions at the same time, we have no idea what the outcomes would be like. I also point out that they gave Shaq a new knee, no questions asked, and he was going back to basketball, right? So they'll say, oh, like as a fat person, you shouldn't get joint, knee replacement or hip replacement because you're just going to ruin it with your big fat body. But in fact, they gave Shaq a new knee and he was going to go play basketball again. So it says something about who and what we value. And then the last thing I'll point out is that if you have joint problems, you'd feel better if you could fly, right? If you could levitate, take the pressure right off your joints. But what I'm not going to do is say you should go home, jump off your garage and flap your arms as hard as you can, because it almost never works. But if it did, like, wouldn't it be great? That's not responsible medical care. You can't do that. But that's what weight loss is. Here, try this thing that has the opposite of the intended effect the majority of the time. If it doesn't work for you, we're going to blame you. Like if you fell, if you didn't fly off the garage, no one would be like, you're lazy and lack willpower. But that's what happens with fat people all the time. And so again, it just all goes so deep. So my question if I go to a healthcare practitioner is, what would you tell a thin person with this same issue? And let's start with that. And is my size causing you to struggle with giving me the same evidence-based care that you would give a thin person? And if so, how can we overcome that? I go hard at the doctor's office. I want my interactions with doctors who are being fat phobic, I want them to remember it. I want them to have discomfort around it so that when it comes up with somebody else, maybe they'll act differently. So I would go even harder than that. But to ask that, like, what would you do for a thin person? And then like, let's try that. What 50 things would you tell a thin person with knee pain to try? And none of them, by the way, are go exercise more. Right? I've been much smaller with knee pain growing up, and absolutely none of the ideas for joint pain are you should go out and exercise a lot. Only fat people are given that particular piece of advice when we're dealing with joint pain, especially sudden onset. So I hope that's helpful. I'll try to get off my soapbox now, but that's one of the ones that really bugs me.
Amazing. Thank you.
Sure.
So I want to jump in here real quick. Can you guys hear me? Ragen, can you hear me? Okay, cool. I want to jump in here because it doesn't look like Ragen, you're going to plug your workshop. So I want to plug your workshops real quick. Some of the lectures that I've already seen from Ragen are workshops that she's done. So she had done Talking Back to Fatphobia one. Just like 2 days ago, there was a, Ragen, can you say what the exact name of it was?
Dealing with Fatphobia at the doctor's office.
Yes, thank you. So, and they were excellent. So if you love today's lecture, you definitely want to attend Ragen's workshops that are also on Zoom. She's amazing. She's a pay what you can option. I'd be happy to sponsor anyone who wants to attend. If you can't pay, I would love to pay for you to attend Ragen's workshop too. They're so good. So yeah, it was excellent, and it went so deep into the question that you just asked. So I wanted to give a little plug for Ragen's workshops. I know she has another one coming up next month. So danceswithfat.org is where you can find those.
You're the best. Thank you. Yeah, you can danceswithfat.org, and then if you go to the page monthly online workshops, you can see next month's is Getting Jiggly with It, Movement in a Fat Body. And then you can also get the videos from the ones I've done before, and all of them have a pay what you can option. So there's that. Thank you. Other questions? Anything else before we go on to our final question? These have been just excellent questions too. High quality Q&A, y'all. All right, last question. How can I be a good size acceptance ally what is a call to action for me to follow moving forward from this presentation? I would go back to that. If you see something fat phobic, say something against fat phobia as an ally. And you can also do this privately. So again, we never want our ally work to place a burden on the person experiencing the discrimination. And we also, as an ally, want to try not to center just our voice. So having, some go-to resources that center fat voices, and again, I say Chelsea Lincoln, so that you can put those in the discussion. So you can say, oh, hey, this is a problem for a lot of people, and like, here's why, and here's some more resources on this. But just saying anything, being part of the conversation is incredibly helpful. And you can also support privately. When I see something, in a community that I'm not part of, I'll educate, I'll center voices, and then I might message the person if I know them and say, hey, is there anything I can do to support? Feel free to ignore this. I don't want to create any more labor for you. So you can do that too, just to let people know I'm here to support, but I'm also not trying to make this a burden for you, where you have to like bake and feed me ally cookies for doing what I should be doing in the first place. So. Anything else before we close this up? Maddie, do you have another question or just didn't learn? No, okay, cool. This
Sorry
comes from
about
being
that.
a professional speaker. I will call on you if you so much as move. All right, I think, am I right, Kaylin? Is that all?
As far as I can tell, that is all. That was an awesome Q&A. I hope that you guys all enjoyed the Q&A as much as I do. There's a comment in the chat. Thank you, Ragen. This was so wonderful. I know I had a great time. I saw a preview of this presentation. I still had like a great time tonight, or this morning if you're in Taiwan. So thank you so much, Ragen. We will be posting in the comments of the video and also currently on the website follow-up resources. Shout out to Chelsea Lincoln who helped us compile the list of resources on the website. And you can stay in touch with Ragen through her website, danceswithfat.org. I love Ragen, and hopefully you guys do too, and you'll continue to follow her. And also we will be, there's more comments. This was amazing. Thank you, Ragen and CVC. So we're still working out the details, but stay tuned because Chelsea Lincoln of Fat Vegan Voice will be doing a follow-up lecture that is intended to build upon this one. So however you learned about this event, stay tuned because we're excited for there to be more to come. All right, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks,
Thank
Kaylin,
you.
Evan, and Jema, and everyone for having me. I'm so grateful.
Aw, thank you. Good night or
Thank
good
you for doing this.
wherever you are. Have a great day.
Yay, bye.